the reflective planning session. The reflective planning session is a coaching tool that is a pre-conference. It exists for planning purposes. Its purpose is to sit down with the teacher and think through in a way that's even deeper and even more specific than perhaps the teacher has had a chance to think on his own or on her own. So the idea of a planning session is to always choose a lesson that's 3, 4, 5 days down the road. We don't want the teacher to have it perfectly planned yet. We don't want every T crossed and I dotted. We want a little wiggle room so that we can ask some very specific questions. First of all, what are your goals for this lesson? Listen very intently to what the teacher has to say. Seek clarification if you have to. What does understand look like? If you want students to actually calculate what would be right and what would be wrong. The second thing we'll ask teachers to do is consider their activities. How are you going to teach this? Will you have students sitting down or standing up? Will they be individuals? Will they be small groups? Don't expect the teacher to have it all figured out. We really want to think through that with them. What are all the possible activities? And then examine how congruent are each of those activities back to the coaching goal. Thirdly, we want to help a teacher think through his or her assessments. What would mastery look like? Think ahead. The students are doing exactly what you asked them to do, and you're thinking to yourself, this is going well. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are the students demonstrating that tell you as a teacher they are achieving mastery just as I hoped they would? In this coaching session, it's also a good idea to always end with some feedback. Was I helpful, you might ask, as a coach? Did the process feel comfortable? Did we actually plow any new ground? Did I help you to see and think through some things that you might not have had a chance to see or think through on your own? That's the purpose of the reflective planning session. Nikki Williams, thank you very much for participating in our coaching demonstration today.
Thank you.
As we were just chatting, you've got a couple of items of news, don't you? First of all, you're newly engaged, right?
Yes.
I've been married for 27 years. I highly recommend it. Right? So I think you'll be in good shape there. If you need some help a couple of years down the road, don't call me. I'll give you some books. But another thing, you just this year are nationally board certified.
Yes.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about the process. I bet that was hard but instructive too, wasn't it?
Well, it was very instructive. We were able to really kind of focus in on some social studies, math and science, and the writing part was really terrifying for me because I'm more of the math and science person. But I was able to kind of really get into those courses and kind of really dig in and get the real information out and pull the students' strengths as well as my strengths.
Now, on a day-to-day basis, you teach 5th graders and you teach them math and science.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Good. Excellent. Well, here's what we're going to do. Today, we're going to do what's called a reflective planning session.
Okay.
And here's the outline. You're going to think about, you've already thought about, an upcoming lesson. I think we're going to be talking about fractions, rational numbers. But it's enough days out that you don't have it completely figured out yet. You've got a little bit of wiggle room. I'm going to then step in as your coach and ask you some questions that'll help you think about this upcoming lesson even more clearly and even more deeply than you could have done it on your own. Now let's face it, you're going to teach a great lesson no matter what. My job is to kind of be another set of eyes and ears and ask some questions that'll help you to think a little differently about your lesson. You know, 2 heads are better than 1. And so I want to be that second head that helps you to get there. I'm going to ask you some questions about your goals. What do you want students to know and be able to do when they're finished with this lesson? I'll ask you some questions about your activities. Okay, then what are they going to do? Are they going to get up and jump or dance or stand in line or recite or any of those things? And then finally, I'll ask you some questions about assessment. I'll say, you know, thinking to the end of the lesson, to really see it going well, what are some of the things that you're going to be looking for? Let's say, okay, I got them. That's exactly how I hoped that it would work. At the very end, I'll ask you for a little feedback. Okay, how did that feel? Was that valuable? Did I structure it appropriately? Did I make it feel non-evaluative? Because that's what I want to do. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great.
All right, let's get started with goals then. So, fractions. A lot of things you can do, a lot of places you can go with fractions. So, talk a little bit, as you've been thinking, about this specific upcoming lesson. Talk about the goals you have in mind for this one.
Well, I really would love for my students to be able to add and subtract fractions with like denominators as well as unlike denominators.
Okay. So both add and subtract.
Yes.
Both like and unlike.
Correct.
So in other words, you want them to actually, at the end of the day, or at the end of the lesson, you want them to actually give them a problem, they do it, give it back to you, is right.
That's right.
Adding fractions and subtracting fractions with like and unlike denominators.
That's correct.
Now, if you think about that, that's a lot of instruction. So let me ask you to be just a little more narrow.
Okay.
We could talk about all of that, but it would take us a long time.
Right.
So let's either say like denominators or unlike denominators. Now, unlike is harder.
Yes.
So let's do that.
Okay.
So let's forget like denominators. Let's say add and subtract fractions. Let's assume that they're able to do it with like denominators.
Okay.
Now you're going to go into the whole, I'm exhausting my knowledge of greatest common factor, least common denominator, all that stuff. Okay. So I want my students to be able to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators.
Correct.
Excellent. Let's talk about some activities then. So with that in mind as your goal, that's what you want them to know and be able to do. What are some of the activities that you've, and I don't expect you to have them all planned out, but what are some that you're thinking about? What will they do?
Well, I know that we need to start concretely.
Right.
So with some pictures, maybe have them be able to divide those pictures up into parts and be able to kind of come up with their own common denominator, because we know that's something they're going to have to do with the unlike denominators.
So
and
pictures
I think the
like, what, a picture of a pizza?
Well, or it's usually easier with the bars, you know, if they can go like with the rectangular bars. And so maybe have them divide the bars into fractions, like a 1/2 plus a 3/4.
Right.
And then they would have to find out that that common denominator was the 4.
Gotcha.
And put the halves in the 4.
So some manipulative, some pictures.
Yes.
So an activity, and forgive me for being, slow,
That's okay.
would be maybe they're sitting, what are they, in pairs? Are they in groups? Are
Groups,
they individually? Probably groups. And in front of each of them they have, what, like little rectangular pieces of paper.
Right.
And you're going to say, okay, peel these away, that's half of the bars.
Yeah.
Now show me 3/4 of the bars.
Right.
And they're just sort of manipulating
That's
that.
right.
So that is an activity that would be necessary, wouldn't it? If they're ever going to add and subtract, they've got to be able to first identify
That's right.
fractions and numerators and denominators.
That's correct.
That makes good sense. All right, what else then? So they've done that.
Okay.
You're looking there. They're able to do that pretty well. What might come next? What's another activity?
Well, since that was the concrete, then we move more into the abstract.
Okay.
More of giving them a problem and saying, okay, now you add and subtract it without a picture maybe.
Okay. So strips, this would be whole class?
Could
maybe?
start out whole
Like
class.
that? Overhead projector, digital, whatever you've got in your classroom.
Right, smartboard.
Smartboard. So you could just say, okay, 1/2 plus 1/3.
Right.
And instead of having it as a manipulative, you're just going to write it out, something like that. And then you might do a little, what, like a guided demonstration, like I'll work one, you work along with me. Here's how we have that. Here's our thought process. Right?
Ask lots of questions to see what their thinking is.
What is the thought process there? So you've got this up on the screen, all right? And you got 5th graders.
Right.
So some of them already know how to do this really well, but some others just haven't gotten
That's
it yet.
right.
Is that right?
That's definitely right.
They don't have mastery on this. They did okay with the manipulatives.
Right.
But now it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty. 1/2 plus 1/3. Step 1 is, step 2 is, step 3 is, step 4 is. Is that what you would do?
Yes.
Take them through that?
Oh, yeah.
So step 1 would be
For them to look at the denominators
okay.
and know that those are different and they can't just add them together.
There you go. So step 1 is, do I need to do the unlike denominator thing? All right. Denominators like or different. Step 2 then.
Then they need to come up with what would be common, like a multiple that would have, they would both have in common.
Great. And you'd work through a couple of those.
Yes.
In this case, it'd be 6,
6,
right?
yeah.
Am I good?
You're very good.
See how I picked an easy one to work on? All right. So then, is that the greatest common factor?
It would be the least common.
That's the least common
multiple.
denominator. Least common multiple.
In this case, denominator, but it is the multiple.
Right. It's the least common multiple, but you're looking at denominators. Okay, and then there'll probably be some practice on that.
Yes.
Because you've got to master this. These kind of chain, don't they?
Yeah.
This is dependent on this.
It is.
If you don't get this, you can't do this.
That's right.
Better be sure that we got this.
We better be.
Gotcha. Least common multiple. Then step 3 would be.
Then they would have to find an equivalent fraction.
Is equivalent fractions, right? In sixths, and then add or subtract.
And then add or subtract.
And that's the process, basically. And so probably as a second activity then, you would take them through that, and then you might take them through it again.
Right.
And then you might take them through it again.
Right.
And then at some point you'd want to, what, have them try some.
Try some,
right?
yes.
So would that be on paper, you think, or something on the screen, or the whiteboards holding it up?
They could do the whiteboards, and then
like
as a
those?
group, I like for them to do it as a group and then kind of discuss what they've done. And then have a person.
So a second activity is kind of a guided demonstration on the smartboard. A third activity is to get with a group and work on some together.
Right.
Where they're going through the process. Give a little peer feedback.
Right.
Maybe. Okay. The fourth activity, after they've done that a little bit, would be, maybe some individual work. Not putting words in your mouth. Just kind of follow
good.
where they write it down and maybe hold it up.
Yes.
And then you can check it and assess it. Good. Now those activities all seem to me to be pretty well aimed at your goal of adding fractions with unlike denominators. Okay, let's go to the assessment then.
Okay.
Fast forward your thinking, it's towards the end of the period, you're saying to yourself, wow, this is really going well. You know, what is it that you're actually seeing and hearing them do that convinces you that they've mastered this, they're doing this well? What do you see?
Well, I definitely would like to hear them say, I can't add those two denominators because they're different.
Right.
So I know we have to come up with a common denominator, so that would be a great word I'd like to hear.
Right.
I would love to hear them say equivalent fractions, because then they know that they are creating an equivalent fraction. And then at the end, knowing that once those denominators are the same, they now can add those numerators.
So you've got this little kind of a 4-step, I don't know, task analysis or formula in there where decide if they're the same or different, right? Choose your least common multiple, which would be your lowest common denominator.
Right.
Change to equivalent fractions, and then perform the addition or the subtraction.
That's correct.
So those are the 4 things that you are assessing. So the way you might do that is you might say, okay, here's a problem. What, talk through it and let me listen?
Oh yeah.
Would that be something
that you might do?
That's a great idea. Okay.
Yes.
And you're listening for you're listening for, yes, this one needs a common denominator.
Right, yes.
No, this one doesn't.
Right.
You're listening for that term, you're listening for equivalent fractions, and then you're watching for them to be able to do that. What else might you assess? So you're listening as they're working in groups. Now you also said that you might use the, like the boards for individuals. So now everyone has a board, and you're putting a problem maybe up on the projector.
Right.
And you're saying, go through the steps. Do you think you'll take it through them one step at a time? Or do you think you'll let them work on it for the whole problem? Or
well, maybe one time together. We would do it step by step.
Right.
And then the next time I would come back and maybe give them the problem.
All right, so here it is. You've got, 1/3 plus 3/7, and you say go. And they're doing maybe a whiteboard on the marker.
Right.
Then you're saying, okay, show me what you got. And you're scanning around and you're thinking to yourself, yes, 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 no, almost, maybe.
Right.
And then that kind of tells you where you're going.
Right.
Good. So you're listening, I'm talking about assessments.
Right.
You're listening for them describing the process. That's really important to you, not just to get the right answer,
Right.
but to get the right process.
Definitely.
And you're making them prove their mastery by showing you the correct solution. You want them to have steps on there?
Sure. I'd love for them to have the steps.
So you can kind of look at that as well. So that's your goal. Those are your activities.
Okay.
These are your assessments. Okay? Good. What I might do is just take some of the notes that I took here, make you a copy of it, kind of say, here's the notes on our coaching session.
Okay.
This is the goal I decided on. Here are the 4 activities that are congruent.
Right.
And here are the 2 types of assessments and what I'm going to be listening and watching for.
Okay.
And then when you get a chance to teach this lesson, come back and let me know how
Okay.
it went. I'd be interested for you to say, hey, here's how it went like I thought it would. Here's how it didn't go
Right.
like I thought it would. Good. Let me get a little feedback from you on the coaching session.
Okay.
Typically, as a teacher, you're asked just to go teach the next lesson. I guess my preference is that every once in a while we all get a little bit of help to run through it before we actually go and teach it. So I wanted to sit down with you today and say, here's this upcoming fractions lesson. Let's talk about some goals, some activities and assessments ahead of time. Number one, I didn't want this to feel like it was a judgment or an evaluation. I wanted it to feel like kind of a professional discussion.
Right.
Like maybe, gosh, I don't know, two football coaches thinking about how we're going to beat Carolina,
Right.
you know, the next day or something.
Yes.
So give me some feedback on that. Did it feel non-evaluative and non-judgmental and like a good professional conversation?
Very much so. And I'm usually one that has great ideas, but then carrying them out.
It helps
I
to
need
think
to kind
through
of
it a little bit.
a
doesn't it?
step-by-step process, and this gave me some
Right.
great information on step-by-step
Yeah.
how I can, assess the students, how I can hear those words that I
Right.
need to hear.
Yeah.
So this was wonderful.
Now this is just me, but I'm thinking, kind of as an idea person like you are, as we worked through this, I felt like you were pretty set on your goals, right? That was
Yes.
pretty clear.
Yes.
And your activities, I thought, were very congruent and organized. But where I felt like we made a little bit of progress or a little bit of new thinking was in those assessments.
Yes.
Like, what are you really listening for in their group discussions? And what are you really looking for when they show you those problems on the
Right.
whiteboard?
Yes.
So maybe that might be a little something that would come out of our coaching
Yes.
session. Good. Nikki, thank you very much. It was a
Thank
pleasure
you.
working with you, and good luck on that lesson.
My pleasure.